Good Sunday morning, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for July the 23rd. Today we are reading together in 1 Samuel chapter 14, which is going to show us just some of the missteps of Saul as king. We're going to see a lot of his really poor negative character traits coming out within this chapter, but I want to contrast that with Jonathan. I think we see Jonathan here being very different from his father. Whereas Saul's going to show himself to be very compulsive. He's going to be very self-centered. Jonathan's going to show himself to be much more concerned with God and doing things with God's help and doing things according to God's ways. And it just really shows us the unfortunate reality that the people demanded a king on their time, and they got the king, but he was actually the king they really deserved, more so than the king they needed. So let me get the text of 1 Samuel chapter 14 up on the screen for us, and we'll read along together here on this fine Lord's Day. 1 Samuel chapter 14 really is going to begin in 1 Samuel chapter 13, verse 23. Again, just another kind of funky, unfortunate chapter break, but nonetheless, 1 Samuel 13, verse 23. Now the Philistine garrison took control of the pass at Michmash. In chapter 14, verse 1, that same day, Saul's son Jonathan said to the attendant who carried his weapons, "Come, let's cross over to the Philistine garrison on the other side." However, he did not tell his father. Saul was staying under the pomegranate tree in Migron on the outskirts of Gibeah. The troops with him numbered about 600. Ahijah, who was wearing an ephod, was also there. He's basically the chaplain of the army, it seems. He was the son of Ahitub, the brother of Ichabod, son of Phinehas, son of Eli, Yahweh's priest at Shiloh. But the troops did not know that Jonathan had left. There were sharp columns of rocks on both sides of the pass that Jonathan intended to cross to reach the Philistine garrison. One was named Bozez, and the other was named Seneh. One stood to the north in front of Michmash, and the other to the south in front of Geba. Jonathan said to the attendant who carried his weapons, "Come on, let's cross over to the garrison of these uncircumcised men, and perhaps Yahweh will help us. Nothing can keep Yahweh from saving, whether by many or by few." His armor bearer responded, "Do what is in your heart. Go ahead. I'm completely with you." "All right," Jonathan replied. "We'll cross over to the men and then let them see us. If they say, 'Wait until we reach you,' then we will stay where we are and not go up to them. But if they say, 'Come on up,' then we'll go up, because Yahweh has handed them over to us. That will be our sign." They let themselves be seen by the Philistine garrison, and the Philistines said, "Look, the Hebrews are coming out of the holes where they've been hiding." The men of the garrison called to Jonathan and his armor bearer, "Come on up, and we'll teach you a lesson," they said. "Follow me," Jonathan told his armor bearer, "for Yahweh has handed them over to Israel." Jonathan climbed up using his hands and feet with his armor bearer behind him. Jonathan cut them down, and his armor bearer followed and finished them off. In that first assault, Jonathan and his armor bearer struck down about 20 men in a half-acre field. Terror spread throughout the Philistine camp and the open fields to all the troops. Even the garrison and the raiding parties were terrified. The earth shook, and terror spread from God. When Paul's watchmen in Gibeah of Benjamin looked, they saw the panicking troops scattering in every direction. So Saul said to the troops with him, "Call the roll and determine who has left us." They called the roll and saw that Jonathan and his armor bearer were gone. Saul told Ahijah, "Bring the ark of God," for it was with the Israelites at that time. And while Saul spoke to the priest, the panic in the Philistine camp increased in intensity. So Saul said to the priest, "Stop what you're doing." Saul and all the troops with him assembled and marched to the battle. And there the Philistines were fighting against each other in great confusion. There were even Hebrews from the area who had gone earlier into the camp to join the Philistines. But even they joined the Israelites who were with Saul and Jonathan. When all the Israelites who had been hiding in the hill country of Ephraim heard that the Philistines were fleeing, they also joined Saul and Jonathan in battle. So Yahweh saved Israel that day. The battle extended beyond Beth Aven, and the men of Israel were worn out that day, for Saul had placed the troops under an oath. The man who eats food before evening before I have taken vengeance on my enemies is cursed. So none of the troops tasted any food. Everyone who went into the forest, or everyone went into the forest, and there was honey on the ground. Even the troops entering the forest, they saw, or excuse me, when the troops entered the forest, they saw the flow of honey, but none of them ate any of it because they feared the oath. However, Jonathan had not heard his father make the troops swear the oath. He reached out with the end of his staff and he was carrying and dipped it in the honeycomb. When he ate the honey, he had renewed energy. And then one of the troops said, "Your father made the troops solemnly swear, the man who eats food today is cursed," and the troops are exhausted. Jonathan replied, "My father has brought trouble to the land. Just look at how I have renewed energy because I tasted a little of this honey. How much better if the troops had eaten freely today from the plunder they took from their enemies? Then the slaughter of the Philistines would have been much greater." The Israelites struck down the Philistines that day from Michmash all the way to Aijalon. Since the Israelites were completely exhausted, they rushed to the plunder, took sheep, goats, cattle, and calves, slaughtered them on the ground, and ate meat with the blood still in it. Some reported to Saul, "Look, the troops are sinning against Yahweh by eating meat from or with blood still in it." Saul said, "You have been unfaithful. Roll a large stone over here at once." He then said, "Go among the troops and say to them, let each man bring me his ox or his sheep. Do the slaughtering here, and then you can eat. Don't sin against Yahweh by eating meat with blood in it." Every one of the troops brought his ox that night and slaughtered it there. Then Saul built an altar to Yahweh. It was the first time he had built an altar to Yahweh. Saul said, "Let's go down after the Philistines tonight and plunder them until morning. Don't even let one remain." "Do whatever you want," the troops replied. But the priest said, "Let's approach God here." So Saul inquired of God, "Should I go after the Philistines? Will you hand them over to Israel?" But God did not answer him that day. Saul said, "All you leaders of the troops, come here. Let's investigate how this sin has occurred today. As surely as Yahweh lives, who saves Israel, even if it is because of my son Jonathan, he must die." Not one of the troops answered him. So he said to all Israel, "You will be on one side, and I and my son Jonathan will be on the other side." And the troops replied, "Do whatever you want." So Saul said to Yahweh, God of Israel, "Why have you not answered your servant today? If the unrighteousness is with me or in my son Jonathan, Yahweh, God of Israel, give Urim. But if the fault is in your people Israel, give Thummim." Jonathan and Saul were selected, and the troops were cleared of the charge. Then Saul said, "Cast the lot between me and my son Jonathan." And Jonathan was selected. Saul commanded him, "Tell me what you did." Jonathan told him, "I tasted a little honey with the end of the staff I was carrying, and I'm ready to die." Saul declared to him, "May God punish me and do so severely if you do not die, Jonathan." But the people said to Saul, "Must Jonathan die? He accomplished such a great deliverance for Israel. No, as Yahweh lives, not a hair on his head will fall to the ground, for he worked with God's help today." So the people redeemed Jonathan, and he did not die. Then Saul gave up the pursuit of the Philistines, and the Philistines returned to their own territory. When Saul assumed the kingship over Israel, he fought against all his enemies in every direction, against Moab, the Ammonites, Edom, the kings of Zobah, and the Philistines. Wherever he turned, he caused havoc. He fought bravely against the Amalekites and rescued Israel from those who plundered them. Saul's sons were Jonathan, Ishvi, Mal-Chishua. The names of his two daughters were Merab, his firstborn, and Michal, the younger. The name of Saul's wife was Ahinoam, daughter of Ahimaaz. The name of the commander of his army was Abner, son of Saul's uncle Ner. Saul's father was Kish, and Abner's father was Ner, son of Abiel. The conflict with the Philistines was fierce all of Saul's days. So whenever Saul noticed any strong or valiant man, he enlisted him. And that is 1 Samuel chapter 14. All right, so all this is carrying over from the constant fight that's going to be between the Israelites and the Philistines. This takes us back even to some of the time of the judges with Samson. Remember, they were very comfortable with the kind of frenemy relationship. The Israelites were comfortable with the frenemy relationship they had with the Philistines. They kind of submitted to them, or kind of did kind of nothing. They submitted to them, and the Philistines were somewhat kind to them. Going back to chapter 13, one thing I didn't really stress enough yesterday was at the end of chapter 13 was the fact that the Philistines had a technological advantage over the Israelites as well. We're talking this around the beginning of the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, or I guess it'd be the Iron Age, where metalworking is beginning to be an even greater thing. And the Philistines seem to have that figured out. So they had, again, in almost every way, an advantage over the Israelites, both technologically and also, I think, psychologically. That the Israelites for a lot of these battles just seem psyched out by the Philistines. They're scared of them. And I think that is especially seen in how Saul responds to the Israel or to the Philistines. Here within the first part of the chapter, we see really Jonathan and Saul being contrasted with one another. Jonathan shows himself to be someone who's courageous. He wants to go fight. He trusts the Lord to be able to be with him in the fighting, whereas Saul is just kind of chilling. He's not doing anything. He's hanging out under the pomegranate tree in Migron with 600 of his soldiers and his army chaplain, not doing anything. Jonathan says, forget this. We should be fighting against the Philistines. He goes and approaches a garrison, and he puts all of his confidence in Yahweh to deliver this garrison. He tells his armor bearer, we're going to go up together, and we'll allow them to see us. And if they say, you wait there, we're coming to you, then we won't attack. But if they tell us, come at us, then we'll go and we'll trust Yahweh in this, because Yahweh doesn't need a lot of people in order to succeed. He can succeed with a lot, and he can succeed with a little. His full trust is in Yahweh. And what Jonathan is doing here in the situation as well is he's not making it very easy on himself. In fact, the way he sets this up, he's putting himself at a tactical disadvantage as he's having to climb up to these Philistines. They very well could just kill him on the climb. But again, he's trusting in Yahweh. He believes that Yahweh has the power, not only the power to deliver, but he has the desire for his people to be delivered from the Philistines here in this moment. So because of his courage, because of his willingness to act, again, we're seeing his action, his courage versus Saul's inaction, really fear in many ways. Saul always seems to be very paranoid, a very unsettled person. We're going to see throughout this chapter that he is rash, he is prideful, he is very self-unaware, he's very impulsive, and for that, there's great trouble. But Jonathan, at the beginning section of this chapter, experiences a great victory because of his trust and faith in Yahweh. Well, the Philistines are freaking out now because of what just happened, so they're running around going nuts. We even read crazily that there were some Hebrews that actually joined themselves with the Philistines, and once the tides turned, they actually flipped back to the Hebrew side, which we would obviously be needing to have some very strong conversations with them about what caused them to go the other way to begin with. But nonetheless, once Saul sees the Philistines being ripe for picking because they're in a state of terror and confusion because of Jonathan and Yahweh, he's like, well, now I'll act. Now I'll go, and now I will fight. So they go, they assemble together, they go, they fight. All of those who have been hiding, Saul and his people, and also those who had been hiding in the hill country of Ephraim, they come and they all join in the battle. But notice verse 23, again, my suggestion to us all throughout this text is to continue to focus on what Yahweh is doing. Not necessarily putting the full focus on Saul or Jonathan or Samuel or anybody else, but see what God is doing. For it is God, it is Yahweh who saved Israel that day, verse 23. But we're given some more detail about this day, it seems, and it seems to be that all of this is taking place in the same battle, in the same setting. That the soldiers are exhausted. Why are they exhausted? Well, they're exhausted because they haven't eaten. Why have they not eaten? Well, because Saul made a stupid vow. Saul made a very rash, very impulsive vow. He made things personal. He's like, nobody's going to eat until I'm able to beat my enemies. So in the course of this day, then they're tired because they have no energy. They don't have anything to run off of. Their fuel is running low in a very real sense. So whenever they enter this forest and they see honey all over the place, honey, I don't if you know anything about honey, a really pure sugar, natural pure sugar, it gives you very quick burst of energy. People who run marathons or do very intense physical activity, they'll sometimes carry around little honey packets to eat on the go because it gives them a burst of energy. That the troops certainly could have used this in this moment. Jonathan knows this, so Jonathan eats the honey, but he doesn't know about this vow. So whenever the rest of the troops see him eating this honey and they confront him about it, I want to notice what Jonathan says in verses 29 and 30. He basically says, my dad's a fool. My dad has done something very, very foolish. He's made a dumb decision here. My father has brought trouble on the land. Just look at how I have renewed energy because I tasted a little of this honey. Wouldn't this day have been so much better if the troops would have been fully fueled, if they had had the energy? We've already had success, but it would have been even better if my dad hadn't made things more difficult. He acknowledges the foolishness of his father, but he's not trying to cause a mutiny at all. He doesn't tell them that they should break. He actually does not say that. I think that's very important to recognize that he does not tell them to ignore Saul's oath and eat the honey. He just says, well, I didn't know about it, but that was really stupid for my dad to do, to make that particular vow. Well, then verses 30 and 31 through 33 tell us that here's another negative consequence of Saul's foolish vow, his rash, impulsive vow. After they finally do have victory, then they gather up all the animals instead of bleeding the animals out as they should have, because Leviticus, Leviticus chapter 11 talks about the clean animals they could eat. But then it is in Leviticus chapter 17 that talks about how life belongs in the blood. Leviticus 17:11 specifically, that the people were not to eat blood, for life belongs to it, and that belongs to Yahweh. So they were to bleed animals out, and then they could eat them. I'm not sure here if they just don't let the animals bleed, or if they're almost eating the animals raw. I'm not really sure. You just think about, they're so exhausted that they finally get these animals, and they might just, I can't speak with certainty here, but you can almost imagine them just eating these animals raw and eating everything with it. That would be the most extreme thing they could have done here. Or they could have just, again, not bled the animals out properly and cooked the meat with the blood still in it, which still is a violation of the law. But again, why is this happening? It's happening because of Saul. He put his troops in this very difficult situation. Still, it's on them. They have personal accountability, but Saul contributed to their poor decision-making because of his poor decision-making. Again, this is a violation. This is sin against Yahweh. So that's brought to Saul's attention. And Saul begins trying to make amends for that, it seems, builds an altar, offers up other things, and it goes on from there. Well, Saul's still in pursuit of the Philistines. He's still in pursuit of the Philistines, and he wants to go after them. And I just find it very interesting, the response of his troops to Saul throughout the rest of this text. Because first of all, let's go plunder. And you can almost see them like, okay, Saul, whatever you want. Well, it's the priest who steps in and says, well, let's inquire of God first. So Saul does. Saul inquires of God, but God does not answer him. Why? Because it doesn't seem as if God is with Saul in this moment. Why is God not with Saul? I think, again, it just goes back to his impulsiveness. It goes back to him being a fearful man, him being very, very paranoid and not putting confidence in Yahweh. We don't really see God doing that throughout any of this story. We don't see Paul really leaning upon God in the previous sections of the story. We don't really see that. But now he wants to lean upon him, and God's not there, because God's not someone who is just, again, a lucky rabbit's foot in the pocket, or someone we turn to only in a pinch. So Saul's upset about this, and Saul's thinking, okay, something's happened here. Something has happened here today, and I need to know why God's not with me. So what's the issue? As surely, verse 39, as surely as Yahweh lives who saves Israel, even if the sin is because of my son Jonathan, I included that, even if the sin is because of my son Jonathan, he must die. But notice not one of the troops answered him. So we've seen Saul suggests something, do whatever you want. Saul gets crazy, no answer. Saul says, you'll be on one side, I'll be on the other side, and we'll do the Urim and the Thummim type of thing, where it's kind of like casting lots type of issue, where you would assume God's involved there. And the people say, do whatever you want. They don't seem very thrilled with Saul. He doesn't seem to be really endearing trust and following from his troops here. So the Urim and the Thummim are brought. There's the people on this side. There's Saul and Jonathan on this side. Saul and Jonathan are chosen. Well, then Jonathan's on this side, and Saul's on this side, and Jonathan's again chosen. And Saul confronts him, and he says, well, what have you done? And Jonathan says, well, I tasted a little honey with the end of my staff I was carrying. And you know what? If you're going to kill me, I'm ready to die. I think Jonathan's fed up with his dad too. I think everyone here in this story seems just about fed up with Saul, because they're recognizing he's not a good leader. He is impulsive. He is inconsistent. He is prideful. He is extremely self-unaware. But that really sounds like Israel themselves. Again, the people have got the king they deserved, not the king they needed, because they did not wait on Yahweh's time. And Saul says, fine, I'm going to kill you. Saul's out of control. He is absolutely out of control in this moment. But it's the people who step up, because the people rightfully intervene. They recognize that Jonathan's in the right here. Jonathan's the one who has shown true leadership. Jonathan's the one who's shown confidence in God with courage. So no, Saul, you're not going to kill Jonathan. So they redeemed Jonathan. Might have been some sacrifices. I believe there would have been sacrifices that would have been involved here, because Saul's made these oaths. And let's not forget, going back to Jephthah, if you make a rash oath, it can be remedied through sacrifice and such, through giving things to Yahweh, redeeming that. That's probably what's going on here with the people. They're redeeming Jonathan. He does not die. And then Paul just gives up, or I keep saying Paul, Saul just gives up. He goes his way with his people. The Philistines go back to their way, go back to their territory, and the conflicts just continue, not just with the Philistines, but also in Moab and the Ammonites, the Edom and the kings of Zobah, the Amalekites. All these individuals are, all these groups of people are people that Saul wars against throughout the time of his, kingship. And we have his family. He's talked about at the end of the chapter. Then want to note verse 52, that the conflict with the Philistines was fierce all of Saul's days. He never deals with them fully. That was what he's supposed to do. He was supposed to be the one dealing with the people, or dealing with the enemies of God. He's never able to deal with them fully, though. Why? Because we've seen he's a poor leader. He has a number of really negative characteristics, which cause issues, which leads to poor decision-making, poor leadership, and ends up hurting the people, in fact. But notice that Saul responds the way the people did. Remember that whenever the people saw Saul, they saw a big man, big strong man. This is an intimidating figure. He's going to be a great leader for us. What does Saul do? He turns around, he sees anyone that is strong or valiant. Hey, come fight for me. Doesn't really care much about them at all, except that they are strong and valiant. The people wanted that type of king. Now the king wants the type of warrior. Again, it does not lead to success. Only trusting God leads to success. If you have any questions or comment about this text, please feel free to leave that in the comment section below. Again, we're just continuing to add evidence to the reality that Saul's not a good king, that he does not show great characteristics that make a good leader. And I hope that we are thinking about those things again as we're thinking about leadership within our own church, and as we are nominating men to be in those positions. Let's think about the good qualities of leadership and desire to have good leaders among us, to identify those men who have these good characteristics, and to hope that they will accept that role and begin serving the church in those roles. Again, all based upon the fact that they have the right type of mentality, they have the right type of characteristics, they are capable of doing the good work that could be set before them. Saul here doesn't really show that, and it's unfortunate. And we're going to see how that's going to continue to degrade his kingship as we go throughout the upcoming chapters. Looking forward to being with everyone today as we get back to our regularly scheduled programs of our Bible class this morning and our worship assembly at 11 o'clock. We're going to be studying together from Mark chapter 5, the first, I think, 20 verses there of the text, which talks about Jesus dealing with the legion of demons. And we're going to see even his power to control those who are unclean spiritual forces, those who would be against him. Jesus shows control even over them. Remember, who is this Jesus that he controls the winds? Well, he's the same Jesus that we're going to see who's able to control the demons too. Very much looking forward to that study. Again, thanks for tuning in today. Hope I'll see you again tomorrow as we read together from 1 Samuel chapter 15. Take care and God bless.